Okay, well, this was the ticket right here. A little stubby 17 millimeter ratcheting tool. Got a whole set of them. Harbor Freight. Not the best quality, but you know, as much as I use them, they'll probably be fine. So let's catch up on where I'm at. I did tighten up on the motor mounts. So both the 19 millimeter underneath and the top two 17 millimeters are tight. I put the steering rack back on after sliding that U-joint knuckle back on the spline shaft. And unfortunately, my clutch slave cylinder ended up on the wrong side of all this stuff right in there. I was never going to be able to get it back to the bell housing, so I had to take it off the master cylinder, but I got it dangling here on my press. So hopefully the fluid will stay in it, because bleeding the slave cylinder on these cars is awful. It's a horrible process. So now I'm looking at what's next. The exhaust, I think I want to do the wastegate before I do the drive shaft or the torque tube or whatever you want to call it. I don't know why I want to do that. I just think it's better to have this space right here to deal with the wastegate and everything. So what that means is there's two pipes. There's the main pipe that comes off the turbo outlet, and that's actually this long pipe here that somebody eliminated the cat on it, and so it's all one big piece, which kind of sucks. I'm about tempted to put sleeves in there so I'm not stuck with that one long piece. I don't know. I'm debating that. Then the other part of the puzzle, there's two more pipes. There's this pipe here that comes off the wastegate and joins, into the exhaust pipe. I guess at one time it spliced into the cat. I don't know. And then there's another pipe I got over here on the bench, I think. That's this J pipe. That's in the mix as well. So some of this I can go ahead and mount. Another thing I want to do is, I know the engine is pitched forward. Right now, it's resting right there. I'm not super happy about that on that oil tube. So I'm going to put a floor jack under the pan, of course, with a block or something, and pitch it backwards. That'll also help when it comes time to spline this up, because the clutch has to be aligned really well with the shaft for you to do that. So I think that's where I'm going to start. Underneath here is go ahead and kind of get this pitched back, get a block underneath it. There's some other things. I've got this aftermarket oil temperature sender. It's up in there somewhere. I got to fish it out and get it down in here. I think at that point I could probably go ahead and put oil in it. There's a whole mess of stuff. There's a thermostat control I need to get up in there. It'll help to pitch this bell housing backwards to get a little bit more room in there to put that thermostat control. And yeah, so on the exhaust stuff, I think I'm going to need some fresh, those rings, those metal ring gaskets, I call them. I got to see if they're available or not. So let me kind of piece things together, and then I'll pick this back up. So this is another instance where the parts diagram shows both a flat gasket and a sealing ring. You remember earlier video when I was putting the joining the turbo onto the exhaust manifold, I believe there was a joint that called for both, and I put both on. I ordered the flat and the ring. Anyway, that was wrong. Cedric corrected me and said either use one or the other, and I forgot which one I did use. But I'm supposing this is the same situation where Porsche changed their mind at some point and probably started with the ring and decided that was not a good seal and went to a flat 2-hole gasket. Now, I've got the ring, and it cleaned up nicely, so I think I'm just going to reuse that. This is a $45 part. It's ridiculous. But I did note that it doesn't fit. This is probably the reason they changed this. See, it seals where up on the manifold. It fits that orifice quite nicely. However, because this pipe slides in, I believe, into the exhaust manifold, this is kind of left to wander about. So I think what I'm going to do, I've got a little exhaust sealer. I'm going to put some dabs of that around here and hold it centered while I attach this pipe, this J pipe. So there you go. So I got the ring set, and I put the J pipe in a vise and sort of the orientation it's going to go in the car. And I think it is a smart idea to go ahead and get the wastegate on there, if only loosely, because I just remember this being really, really difficult. Of course, all the nuts and bolts were rusted, but I think I'll be ahead of the game if I can just kind of cobble this together loosely and get it up in there. I need to double check this bracket. The parts diagram shows another bracket, so I need to find that. And, you know, if it doesn't fit up in there or whatever, I'll just take it back out. So that's what I'm running with right now. So my wastegate mock-up on vise was off by 90 degrees. You can see I've got everything kind of mounted in there loosely. And then where this bracket comes into play, I think it somehow, excuse me, works hand in hand with the torque tube. I can't remember how that is, but we're going to find out pretty soon. So also another thing I'm looking at is, can I still get this big pipe on? And I think so. Yeah. I think it travels beside the wastegate and then down the tunnel. So it's something that definitely needs to happen after I'm spline up the torque tube. So all good there. You definitely want to put this banjo fitting on the wastegate before you're tight up there, because it gives you enough room to kind of work. Once that tightens up, that's going to get really, really small. So I'm glad I did that now before I tighten those manifold bolts, nuts. So I jacked up the front of the engine and got a couple of little blocks in there. And now the alignment for the torque tube will be much better. So that should go smoothly. I've tightened up on the wastegate on the bottom fitting from the J tube. And yeah, this is a pretty good stopping place for this afternoon. Yeah, we'll keep plugging tomorrow, I think. Okay, next day I'm back at it. I did extract that broken bolt because it was driving me nuts. I actually found this is the correct one with a jam nut on it. So now I'm going to look at the parts diagram and see what the deal is on this bracket. I'm pretty certain somehow it joins onto the torque tube, but I want to know for sure before I stick the torque tube in the clutch. Okay, so what I found, it's this U-bolt bracket that goes up in there. So that U-bolt will go around the torque tube, right? And a couple of short 8mm will join it onto this bracket. So no problems. I can go ahead and insert the splines in the clutch, and then this bracket can happen after the fact. Be a little tight, but shouldn't be a problem. Okay, now that's splined up pretty well. What I did have to do is take those blocks out from underneath, because it turned out the engine was pitched back a little bit too far, and you could see by your alignment of your torque tube plate and the back of the bell housing, you want that gap to be even. And using your floor jack, you just change that geometry. You can also get back here and of course push on the torque tube from the back, and you can turn the shaft by hand to make sure it's splining up properly. But I think everything is good. I've had it happen before where if you don't get proper alignment, it'll actually start to push on the pressure plate. And you'll see that actuator, the fork, actually change. But you would really have to be fighting it for that to happen. So anyway, I'm going to, excuse me, get the 4 bolts in it and then move on. Okay, I just realized there's some heat shielding that needs to be in place. I think I can still get it in without having to pull the wastegate. It's just little sheet metal screws. There's one that goes up top there and another one in that slot right there. So yeah, I can still get those in there. Should have done that before I put the wastegate in, but if I can't get the screws in, I'll pull the wastegate out. So I did have to pull the wastegate back out to get that shield in. And there is also another piece that fits on like this, but that goes below the torque tube. So I'm okay on that for now, but what I am missing is a semicircle heat shield that joins on here and goes around the motor mount and then joins back here. Now I'm not finding that in my part stash. I'm almost beginning to wonder if I ever had it. I'd have to go back and see if I documented taking all this apart right here. But that could potentially be rectified with some heat shield just wrapped around the motor mount. They've got some aftermarket stuff you can use. But it is in very close proximity to that downpipe. And so yeah, it's going to get cooked up. I could even fabricate one out of sheet metal for that matter. Let me keep looking and see if I can find that thing. couldn't find it. So there's my template. It should work fine. 3.5 by 10 inches. Just bend it into shape as I get it in there. Well, that ought to work. I mean, it's pretty much the same shape. All right, got the torque tube bolts back in. Of course, that's a 17mm socket with a U-joint and a couple of long extensions. Another thing, you might want to get this top one in, at least started, before you put the wastegate in. It'll be a lot easier. So now I'm going to put that bracket that holds the wastegate, attach that to the torque tube. Okay, this is a little tricky. So there's an orientation to this bracket, and you want to build it flipped over counterclockwise. Then, so you got your U-bolt on, your 2 nuts and washers. Make sure it's back here. Flip it over, and then put the short bolts in there. What I'm looking at is accessibility to that one nut right here. I'm gonna go ahead and crank that one down, because once I flip it, I ain't gonna be able to get to it. Okay, yeah, that worked out all right. So, wastegate is basically mounted, torque tube on. The other thing I think I can do is, next thing would be the big long pipe, but I got to put in all this shielding under here also. So I might wait on that. I think this is a good stopping point today. I mean, I still have to put on the clutch slave cylinder, of course the starter. That can happen way later. Yeah, let me reevaluate what I want to do next, and I'm going to go ahead and call this a done deal on this video. So this is torque tube, wastegate, all that stuff. Check back in soon, guys.